Hello, and welcome to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world. I'm Paul Carr from TruMedia, and we're back. And excited to kickstart the show again, to talk to guests about what they do, how they use data and analytics, how they got to where they are today, and we are happy to have you join us as well. So our guest today is Joe Hultzen. He spent over a decade working with the Washington Nationals, Arizona Diamondbacks, and Pittsburgh Pirates in a variety of roles. Joe recently joined TruMedia as our MLB Team Lead, where he's our primary liaison with our 22 MLB clients. And I wanted to have him on to help explain some of these different jobs inside an MLB team and front office. I know before I joined TruMedia, I knew what most sports fans know about MLB front offices. We see the front-facing decisions they make. We know there's a big staff of analysts and coaches and scouts who fill these behind-the-scene roles. But I wasn't really sure what different kinds of analysts and scouts and others did. And Joe's done a lot of those jobs, so he's going to help us answer a lot of questions here. So Joe and I will walk through his career path, talk about how he got started with an MLB team in the first place, what he did in his different roles with different teams, pros and cons of working for a club, how the use of data has evolved over the last decade, and some of the different skills needed to work in an MLB front office. Then producer Sergio de la Espriella will join me to react and wrap things up. Without further ado, here's the Expected Value conversation with TruMedia's own Joe Hultzen. We're joined now on Expected Value by TruMedia's own Joe Hultzen, our MLB team lead, who worked for more than a decade with 3 MLB teams. Joe, welcome to the show. I want to walk through your career path. So let me just start. You're in college at Kenyon College, Division III swimming power. This is before you're obviously working for an MLB team. What was your kind of path mentality? How did you kind of approach, hey, I think I might want to work in baseball, and how did you get there?
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. So my path to working in pro ball kind of took a delay. When I was in college, this was a little bit before you had easy access to emails, so I would send form letters to every MLB team, to director of baseball ops, to the GM, to an AGM, and just hope for a response. You know, I would send them my email along with my resume there, and I think I got 5 postcards back in the mail that first time saying, "Thank you for your interest. We have no available jobs at this time." So that was a little discouraging. So I actually did not get a job in pro ball out of college. I went to go work for a travel ball team in DC, where I kind of helped run their baseball ops, as well as coached there. In the meantime, I was still sending out letters, finding emails where I could, and then every winter I would show up to the winter meetings in a suit and tie with a handful of resumes.
You were one of those guys.
Yep. And without any, meetings scheduled, and I would sit in the lobby and wait for someone to pass by that looked like they worked for a team, or try to read name tags, and try to get meetings that way. So it ended up taking 2 years before I got my first job with the Nationals. And that was solely because I went to Kenyon College, and the director of baseball ops with the Nationals ended up going to a rival college in our division and recognized the name. So we ended up talking through that, and that's how I got my first interview in pro ball.
So I could ask a bunch of questions just about that, but so is the winter meetings thing, how much of a route is that still? Because I know they've changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years. How much of a route is the sit in the lobby and flag down people? Is that still a thing for MLB or what?
Yeah, I really don't think it is. I really don't wish that upon anyone, because it is a very humbling feeling to sit in that lobby for really hours on end and just wait. It's really tough. I think, there's a part of me that is glad that I did it, that I went through that. And if someone does that, I commend them for doing it, and they probably get a little check mark in my book if they do it these days. But the access to email and social media and every other kind of avenue, LinkedIn, Teamwork, and all those websites, they just give you such easier access, and a line of communication to a team, that like really didn't exist before. So it still exists. Like I still see guys and girls sitting around the winter meetings, in their suits and ties and stuff like that. But it really is not, the numbers of those people are like greatly diminished now, than it was, 10, 15 years ago.
So you were an econ major at Kenyon, if I'm not mistaken.
I was.
Is
yes.
that still is that something you would recommend? Or at least one of a handful of fields that you would kind of point someone toward if they're interested in getting into, especially the baseball side of things?
Yeah, I think. Well, today I would suggest like anything computer science. That would be my if you were like a very general studies. I don't really know what to go into in today's game. Computer sciences, learning to code, all that is a must-need skill. Economics is is maybe in that same realm, I would say. I certainly didn't think about that when I was in college, though. I actually went to my very first semester at Kenyon. I was in all physics classes. I really liked physics in high school, and then I got to college and I was like, I'll give this a shot, and then realized everything was way over my head. So I ended up switching to econ because a lot of my friends were in econ. It was kind of that in between of objective and subjective reasoning that I kind of gravitated towards, which is a skill that I used, later on in pro ball. I just didn't know it at the time that was a skill set that I was developing.
Yeah, it's a nice mix of art and science, sort of. So you got the internship with the Nationals. What does an intern in baseball ops, or with the Nationals in your case, what does that role do? Because obviously, we have a sense of what an intern does, handling menial tasks and whatever. But what do you do on the baseball ops side?
Yeah. So my first job was that baseball ops intern, and it was every bit of a stereotypical, prototypical internship that you can think of. It was, getting coffee. It was, setting up rooms for meetings. This was long enough ago that, GMs and AGMs would have rosters of the entire organization on physical magnets in their offices. So part of my daily job was to kind of look through all of our transactions, and move the magnets around in everyone's office, so that everything was accurate at the time. And then there were some, you had like daily tasks that you had to do, as well as some like larger month-long, season-long projects. Those consisted of, just cleaning data. It wasn't something that I was like overly accustomed to at the time, but it was, I had to go through and clean data from, Fangraphs, baseball refs that we were scraping from the internet to pull into our own system, and making sure that, everything lined up, that players matched with IDs, and that the numbers lined up correctly. If you have one guy off slightly, everything looks wrong, and you don't want to mess that up. So those were like the basic kind of, overarching tasks as an intern. There were different things like during the draft and during the trade deadline, where things would change a little bit, but you really do these kind of more overarching, broad type of projects, and they're really trying to gauge what your work ethic is like and kind of how your thought process works, so that because it's really like a year-long tryout for a full-time job, and that's like kind of what all internships are, and really to some extent what all jobs in pro ball are, is just a continual tryout. So it was one of those things that you don't necessarily have to do them now. There are people who don't intern now; they get full-time jobs right out of college and stuff like that. But I look better upon people who have had to intern in pro ball, because it's a certain kind of time in your life or experience that you just really don't get anywhere else.
So from there, you go to the D-backs, where you were an assistant in baseball operations. Seems like the next step up? What does the next step up there kind of do? What did you do for a couple of years in Arizona?
Yeah, so my first year, so after Washington, they told me that they didn't have a full-time job. They didn't hire any of the interns that year full-time, but they helped me get an internship, or they helped me set up interviews, and they, wrote letters of recommendation. So then I went to the Diamondbacks, where I interned for another year, actually. And you're making, I think I got a slight pay raise to like $800 a month with the Diamondbacks. And again, like that first year was a lot of the same stuff: getting coffee, setting up meetings, general projects. And then that second year as a assistant, I was helping our advanced scout, who would be on the road with seeing teams ahead of time and writing reports on tendencies, weaknesses, strengths, all that stuff. And then he would send them to me. I would write up any of the analytical notes and put together kind of like the stat packs and all that stuff, and build the binders for the coaching staff, print everything out, give it to the coaches before every series. That was like kind of half of my job. And then the other half was, at the time they were, trying to create a new scouting software. It was talking to scouts about what they needed out of a software, doing expense reports, all that kind of stuff. And then the typical, here's the draft projects, tell us where the, highest percentage of, right-handers come out of every year, or the last like 5 years, where are the tendencies for big leaguers, making their debut, how long do they typically stick, sort of like general research projects like that.
So from there, you go to the Pirates. What did you do initially in Pittsburgh?
So my initial year in Pittsburgh was a fellowship, which was a slight step up from intern. I think that was I think I got another $200 raise.
At that large.
Living large. At this point, I thought I had it made. And so this was, again, another kind of tryout for another full-time job. This was doing research projects, helping with arbitration cases. That was kind of the second time that I got to do a real kind of ARB work type stuff, building decks, putting together arguments, and helping out on that side of the teamwork. And then since I had experience with advancing, whenever there was a team that, we were playing, that was an NL West team that I had, familiarity with. Now, I would, send the then advanced scout any of my notes. But again, more research projects. This is probably around the time where I got really introduced to TruMedia. This was the 1.0 site where it was like, everything was like gray and
the old gray version of the site.
Yeah. So I got really I got introduced a little bit in Arizona, but I really started using it heavily in my first year in Pittsburgh.
All right. So from there, you start with the fellowship and then move to the video advanced scout role. What does that entail? Especially if not familiar, advanced scouting is for at the major league level for the opponent, right? What did you do in that spot?
Correct. Yeah. So this was I did this job for 4 years. It was initially going to be a 2-year job. And I ended up doing it for 4. I worked under Clint Hurdle as the video advanced scout, kind of coordinating and helping out, just making sure all of this stuff was working as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. So the way we had it set up was that I would watch video on every player that we were about to face. So strengths and weaknesses of pitchers and hitters. How are we going to attack hitters as pitchers? And then how are our hitters going to approach every pitcher? So I would write these very long reports. This was one of the times where interning, I think, gave me an idea of the work ethic required for this, because it was, show up to the ballpark at 6 or 7 in the morning, start working, try to get some food and a workout in, but it's watching video for, half an hour, 45 minutes per player, and writing these reports, trying to find these tendencies. And then on the flip side of this, we also had advanced scouts who were working ahead, and I would take their information, compare it to my own information. 80% of the time things line up correctly. The same, we get to the same conclusion. 20% of the time, maybe less, maybe more, things don't line up. And then that's where we have the discussions. And those discussions happen before our advanced meetings and during our advanced meetings, because those are the things that we really want to hammer out. What are we going to do? I say fastballs up, live advanced scout says breaking balls down. They may both work, but what are we going to do? So going through all of that is kind of what the advanced scout does, along with helping coaches and players kind of work through any video and data that they may want to look at to either prepare for the next game or review from the games before. Helping along with that, we had a video crew down there as well who would help them with the big side of video, and I was more of the objective analytic side of things at that time.
And the end result of that process for a given series is kind of what you referenced earlier. You come out with a binder or a bunch of clips, things like that, and you're presenting those to coaches who are then taking them and actively presenting them to players, et cetera.
Yeah. So you'd come out with every 3 days was kind of the cycle, depending on how long the series was. But every 3 days you would come out with one binder for each coach, bullpen, one for the bullpen, and then one for each catcher. And then we would actually PDF all of these files and then give access to them to the players. And so then it was up to, the players could look at them if they wanted to. They could ignore them if they wanted to. They could read as much or as little as they wanted. I learned to not particularly care whether they read it or not. And the coaches they would read it with a fine tooth comb. I mean, they would go through all of this stuff, and really like pick things apart, which was very nerve wracking at the start when I, because here I am a D3, not great baseball player, now writing reports for the big leagues. Like nothing, like I really didn't feel like I had any prep for it up until that first advance report that I wrote. And I really did not want to mess things up. And that was a driving motivation for a very long time, was just like, don't mess this up. Don't get it wrong. Because that's in the advanced world, and as an advanced scout, that's really the only thing you can do. You never get praise for getting things right, because that's your job. Your job is to get things right. But you get all of the blame. Players, coaches.
Do you have an example of, just making this up, your suggestion is to attack a guy this way, and then, he homers off that pitch or something. And then like what is that like behind the scenes when that happens? Obviously anything can happen in a small sample size, but how does that kind of go down in practice?
Yeah. I mean, I remember it. I remember like one instance, I won't name names, but I remember one instance where I was, the initial recommendation was attack fastballs up. Starting pitcher goes out. This hitter gets up to bat, follows the plan, fastball up, maybe a little middle, but I won't, that's for history to decide. And first pitch home run. And, at kind of the game kind of unravels a little bit after that, 2 or 3 runs like come in that inning, another run or 2 the next inning. Guy gets pulled after that like second or third inning, and he comes into the clubhouse and comes into the video room where my office or my desk was, and is hot. It is just, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Fastballs up, home run. Are you kidding me? Like just laying into me.
More colorfully, I'm assuming.
Yes, very much. A lot more colorful. And then I just, you kind of have to sit there and wear it. Like as an advanced scout, and I think in a lot of pro ball, like you do really have to have a pretty thick skin to survive, especially when you're dealing when you're in the clubhouse, because it's a room filled with highly competitive type A people, and tensions run high. Like games really, really matter. Every pitch really, really matters. And having this guy just like lay into me just for 5 minutes straight, I was just like, oh, what can I do? Like there's nothing you can do at that point. And then after the fact, and then after the game, we ended up losing the game, I think. And, we're sitting there, and he comes into the clubhouse and he's like, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm really sorry I did that. Like, are we good? And I'm like, yep, we're good. That's it. And like, I totally forgot about it the next day, and we move on. You wash it off, and tomorrow's another day. So yeah. Getting worn out is not uncommon as an advanced
It reminds me a lot of like my background working in television, where, an anchor is kind of like the pitcher or whatever, where you're the face of everything and it's your job that everybody's seen. And if somebody, if I mess up a research note or someone, rolls the wrong highlight or whatever it is, you might get yelled at, and I got yelled at. But yeah, most of the time, once the adrenaline comes down, wears off, whatever, apologize, you can talk it out. It's fine. But yeah, there's a different element when like it's so public, there's so much on the line. It's, TV is not wins and losses, but baseball is obviously wins and losses. So it's kind of black and white. So yeah, that's a good tip there. Just gotta, at some point, you just gotta wear stuff, so to speak.
Yeah. And as long as, as the player or whoever it is, I've been worn out by coaches before, like as long as, there's a, understanding that where that is coming from, and it's coming from the want to win, which is like just the overarching want and drive of everyone in pro ball and in most things. Like as long as you understand that, like you can get over anything really, really quick.
So then you moved from the more video advanced scout role to a full-fledged scout, or I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it. What was different as you kind of transitioned to a slightly different role?
Yeah. So after my 4 years of advancing, I, to be honest, like got burned out. You know, those are really, really long hours. It's a lot of pressure. Again, it was supposed to be a 2 year stint. Ended up doing it for 4. I was traveling with the team in a lot, the last year, so it's really time consuming. So I needed a change, and I think everyone in the Pirates organization saw that I needed a change. And so I moved into a pro scout role or a scouting assistant role. And that was me covering the Arizona Fall League and the Gulf Coast League rookie ball. I think I had coverage of 15 organizations, and each team had 2 teams. So it was me and another pro scout who would cover these leagues. And it was a lot. It was, you're going to these games. Most of these games are being held at spring training complexes. So Tampa and Phoenix was where I spent most of my time. And you just watch these either newly drafted high schoolers or international guys who are just coming over from Dominican Republic or somewhere, and they're just getting signed, or have maybe a year or 2 of DSL under their belt, and you're watching arguably not great baseball. The games themselves are not particularly smooth. They have a weird flow to them, especially early on when pitchers are on pitch limits. Some things are scripted, like you have to throw a changeup within the first 3 pitches of an at bat, as an example. And so you see these weird, like it's 2-0 because he just, the pitcher just fired 2 fastballs above the catcher's head because he doesn't have command, and now he has to throw a changeup. So it's like it's these weird things like that where you're not really looking at the game itself, but you're trying to pick out traits of a player. Like how do they move? Do they move quickly? Are they fast twitch, slow twitch? Do they kind of have a sense of what they're doing? Do they, when you see a pitcher who has command or feel for it, they immediately jump out. You can sit there with a radar gun and, or look at the TrackMan posts and it says, 97, great. You can look at it. But it's hard because you're trying to project these guys, 4, 5, 6 years down the line of what they could be. So you're really looking for skills more so than like a full-fledged baseball player at that point.
What do you have from a data standpoint there? I mean, you mentioned the radar gun, of course. What else do you have from a data standpoint to try and help you, merge with your eye test there?
Yeah. So it obviously, like the further down you go from a data perspective, from MLB, the less you have. And so, you have velos from either radar guns or from TrackMan that's set up at those stadiums. And if you, start talking to one of the minor league video coordinators down there who's, tracking games with bats and stuff like that, he might tell you like, oh, that exit velo was like 92 on that that double. So you can like make a note of that. You can, some places have more data than others, but the data it lags a little bit. It's not immediate. And same thing with video. Video is like lagging even more so in some cases at those levels. But you do get kind of, you're a little more than the basics of what I think most people are used to. Beyond the like baseball card numbers, you do get like exit velocity and spin rate and break, like horizontal and vertical break. You do get those eventually, but in some cases it just like doesn't show up. If TrackMan's down that day, you're not going to get it. So it is like significantly more, working with your eyes than kind of referencing it off data. And I think that's kind of the point for a lot of that, where like a pro scout, at least in my eyes, like a pro scout, you want to bring something to the table that the data doesn't. And that's your opinion of kind of what does the data not show, and you're not even thinking about it. So, this guy moves quick, this guy moves easy. It's a quick first step. He's smooth around the bag. It's a quick arm action. Those don't like necessarily translate super easy at those levels. Certainly at higher levels with like biomechanic data and stuff like that, you start to get to that, but that doesn't really exist, at least back then, at those levels. So that's what the pro scouts at those levels are really bringing to the table.
So then your final gig with the Pirates was player valuation analyst, which sounds like it brings the econ major back into play a little bit more. What did that role entail for Pittsburgh?
Yeah, finally. So player valuation analysts, or PVAs as we call them, were a kind of creation under the new Sherrington regime. It was an attempt to kind of blend a little bit of the scouting world and a little bit of the analytics world together. So the way things were set up is that we had groups of pro scouts coupled with an analyst, and then we would have conversations similar to what I used to do as an advanced scout. So the pro scout would say, I saw X, Y, and Z of this player. What does the data show? And we would speak to that player from an analytics side. I was probably the least analytical of all of our PVAs. My skill set was video, and that's kind of what I leaned on. But it was a great learning opportunity for me because I started to learn how to code a little bit of SQL, a little bit of Python, a little bit of Tableau type stuff during that time. A little bit of R, trying to figure out some visualizations, because that was kind of the biggest thing for me, was trying to communicate this information to our scouts who maybe don't necessarily care about raw numbers, but if you can present it to them and explain it to them in a very intuitive way, and this goes for everyone, if you can present it intuitively, everyone gets better. So that was something that I tried to at least work towards a little bit. And then working on, we had other projects and other responsibilities of, when a waiver claim would come through, if you were the analyst responsible for that organization, you would write that player up in just a quick summary of I recommend that we claim this guy. I see him above the bottom end of our bullpen, and that type of stuff. And whether we claim that player or not, you just got to make sure that information is in.
Okay. So a lot of player evaluation, but also adding that kind of, financial or roster aspect of it all to try and just put it all together holistically for decision-making purposes.
Yeah. So like the valuation portion of it really came in not necessarily in terms of like dollar value, but prospect value. So when we get to the trade deadline, and for front offices, other than the draft and the trade deadline are like the two big dates for a front office.
And they put them within 6 weeks of each other or whatever.
Yeah, they put them right next to each other. Yeah, just bury everyone, get it all out of the way at one time. Don't let anyone breathe for too long.
Yeah, we'll see you in August.
Yeah, good luck getting down off your caffeine high.
Yeah.
But so we would get to the trade deadline, and you'd sit there and you'd put together trade packages for your players. And that's where the valuation portion of it came in. So if we value our own player X amount, that player, our return like needs to equal that in some way or fashion. And it was up to us as a front office group to kind of figure out that combination or those several types of combinations that we would find acceptable as a return. Now, the one thing about it is, you put together all these, trade ideas and combinations and stuff like that, and you realize like, oh, these sound great. These sound like really good returns. Well, if they sound really good to you, the other team is going to say no. So like you do kind of have to like learn this balancing act of how much are you really going to stomach of return, like how little are you willing to get in return for a player, which is kind of tough at times, but it's a good exercise. I think that's something that I didn't really know going into it, or didn't really like think about a lot, and it's something that came up a lot, is that the other team gets a say in things. The other team, they can easily say no. They can, a trade package could look amazing in your eyes, and they just value your players differently, or they value their player differently. And there's no way of knowing until you have those conversations.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, so that's a good kind of overview of a whole bunch of different roles with an MLB team. Let me ask you a few kind of general questions from the 10 plus years. How did the use of data evolve? I mean, obviously the StatCast era showed up in the middle of that MLB run for you. How did the use of data evolve for teams over the last 10 plus years?
Yeah, so it's evolved exponentially every year that I've been involved with it. Every year there's some new way of looking at things. There's some new statistic. There's some new way of cutting data. There's more and more data now than there ever was before. I mean, as an intern, like I mentioned, we were, at times we're scraping Baseball Reference for information. We're scraping public sites, FanGraphs, stuff like that for our information that we're using internally as an organization. And then as I kind of get, went higher and higher up, you see these analytic departments start to grow. You see, expected information, expected projections and stuff like that become more and more prevalent, not only because they are, we think they're better than the public facing versions of X slug or something like that, or XOPS, just for a very easy example. Like the internal proprietary numbers, take into account things that a public facing site either doesn't think of or doesn't have access to. And those can be things like weather, or like, any number of, factors that, you don't see or think about from a public, or you don't think are important from a public facing point. I remember moving, one of the bigger like uses of analytics was came when I was with the Pirates, and that was the use of the shift. So during my time as the advanced scout, our shift was very dependent on our objective information. We had our infielder coach who would adjust things like based on how they felt, but it was very heavily influenced by the machine, as it was like quote unquote called, or the black box. But what was interesting is that the Pirates actually tried all of the extreme shift stuff out first in AAA. For an entire year. They ran basically a study in AAA the year before they brought it heavily into the big leagues. And they, obviously there were people who were upset by it when it got to the big leagues, guys who just don't, starting pitchers who, ground ball up the middle or to, the opposite field. Now there's no one there because we're all shifted over heavily. Like that should be an out, and they get pissed. So they, in order to prevent or in order to try to curb that argument of this doesn't work, I think they ran this study in AAA, just being like, listen, maybe on a pitch by pitch basis, yes, you're going to lose some outs, but over the course of a season, we are going to gain outs. We as a team, the player individually, maybe not, may be pissed at times, but the team as a whole are going to gain outs based on these shifts. So that was one interesting thing that came from my time. And then now with biometrics data, high-speed video, video tagging, all that stuff, we're getting more and more analytics and data in the hands of people in the front office and into the hands of coaches. Coaches are becoming way more analytically inclined, way more accepting, I think, of data than maybe they were in the past, because they realize how much it can help and how intuitive it is becoming. Before it was this black box of, this number says to stand here, or this number says, swing this way or something like that. It was an analyst, it was a, person coming to tell them that they didn't necessarily trust. But now that the information is available to them and highly intuitive to everyone, everyone's becoming way more acceptive of the data and way more interested in it too, because they realize how helpful a tool it is to their day-to-day lives.
And I think a lot of people initially think about sports analytics jobs, we always think of, teams first, whether it's MLB, NFL, NBA. There's obviously a lot of other things, and we've talked about this on other pods, and we try to have people from a variety of companies and business types within the industry. I guess let me ask, just for your having worked for a team for over a decade for different teams, broadly speaking, kind of what are the couple of biggest pros, the biggest good things about working for a team as opposed to working for whatever it is, a data company or something else in sports analytics?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly overarching. The best part about working for a team is winning. It's, it's feeling like you're a part of those wins, whether in whatever small amount of contribution that you might have on a daily basis. Now, through my experience, that all of that kind of looked a little different. The pros when I was an intern are were significantly different than the pros of when I was an advanced scout or a analyst. When you're an intern, the pros are you're working in pro ball. Those are the big things. As the advanced scout, I was felt the pro was feeling very connected to those wins and losses, feeling like you have a direct day-to-day impact on the game. And then, as a scout and an analyst, it was the best parts were that feeling of contribution to the overarching organization, like that year, not only that year, but for future years. I still feel that decisions that I helped make in the last 2 years are going to affect the team, the Pirates, 2 or 3 years down the road. Now, whether those are positive or negative effects are yet to be seen. I hope they're positive. But knowing that I had those impacts, those wins are the best part of working for a team, in my opinion.
And on the flip side, what are a couple of the challenges that from the outside we may not see that come with working for a team?
Yeah, so I think one thing that everyone kind of assumes is like everyone is the same and everyone's going to work well together and all that stuff. And
right, you're all on the same path. You're all trying to do the same thing, et cetera, et cetera.
You think it's going to be smooth sailing, and in reality, working for a team is like any other company. There are people that you like and don't like, and people that you kind of have to work for and get to work with, and all this stuff. But that is a challenge. And I think another challenge of working with a team that probably people can guess, but don't really know it until they get into it, are just all the sacrifices that you have to make in order to work for a team.
From a timing standpoint and work-life balance, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, work-life balance. If you're doing it right, you can if you want to get a job the next year, your work-life balance kind of goes out the window. It just doesn't exist. You need to be working. You need to dedicate a lot of your life to the team. Especially starting early on, because you have to prove yourself. I missed friends' weddings. I missed vacations and birthday parties. Like if it happened during the baseball season, I just wasn't there. Like that's how it works. The other sacrifices are like if you want to get paid a lot to work in baseball, be a player. Be a really good baseball player.
Be a lefty reliever who goes for 15 years, right?
Exactly. Like that's how you make a lot of money working in baseball. And because it's just not going to happen. It's, and you kind of have to realize that, if you don't think you're making enough money, there are 15 other people behind you who are willing to do the job that you're doing for less money. Like, so kind of that feeling of not having a ton of control year to year, because you do tend to work on 1-year contracts. There's this time in October and November where you're sitting there and you're like, I wonder if I have a job next year.
You're waiting for the call one way or the other.
Yeah, which is a terrible feeling. I mean, there are a lot of people who, go, find out that they are getting a 2% raise on December 15th. And their contract starts, January 1st. And if you don't want it,
you got 2 weeks to figure something else out.
Yeah, and that's really tough. That's something that I don't think that a lot of people really understand about working in pro ball.
Yeah, I feel like it's a thing with a lot of, I don't know, I'll just call them like cool jobs. Like, ooh, you work for this or that, and that's the challenge of sometimes you get paid a lot less than you might doing the same thing elsewhere, but because a lot of other people will do it, that's where you're stuck.
Yeah, for better or worse, you are like, and there's, I guess not for better or worse, there's no really other way of putting it. In my mind is like, you're pretty replaceable. And there are very few people who in front offices who are truly irreplaceable. GMs get fired all the time. Everyone gets fired at some point. You do not work in baseball long enough. If you work in baseball long enough, you are going to get fired. It's just how it happens. You have to accept it. And if you don't get fired working in baseball for 10, 15 years, you're either like not that important. You're not making that many decisions for it to be affected, for you to be affecting anything. Or you're in like the 0.001% of people, who work in baseball. Job security, forget about that.
Not so much
in pro ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good perspective. I think it's important for people to you're going into something, go in with your eyes open. Let me wrap this up with our kind of playing favorite segment where we rip through a number of your favorites just to get to know you a little bit. So what is your favorite number and why? Your lucky number?
Lucky number. So I have two, and one is more recent than the other. My first one is 14. 14 is double lucky. It was my high school number. Growing up, I tried to get it when I went to college, but it was retired, and so I ended up being 35 in college. And my more recent favorite number is 39. And that's actually the number my little brother made his debut with. He made his MLB debut in 2019 with the Cubs, and that was his number. So ever since then, if we have playing the lottery, I make sure to play 39.
Nice. Who's your favorite player when you were a kid growing up?
Growing up outside of DC in the Maryland area before the Nationals existed, being a Baltimore Orioles fan, it's got to be Cal Ripken.
Can't argue with that one.
Yeah, I can't. I wish it was a little more niche and a little more interesting than that, but the Iron Man was great.
Didn't go for Brady Anderson or anything like that?
Couldn't.
So you're in Pittsburgh for a while. What's your favorite Pittsburgh specific food that you would recommend? If I'm visiting, I got to try this.
So it would be a restaurant, and it would be Pepe's. Pepe's is a
sandwich shop, right? I think I've been there.
It's a sandwich shop. They do like cheesesteaks, which isn't obviously a Pittsburgh thing, but they have kind of the chopped cheeses. They have the mixed sandwiches. I typically go with the Whiz with double meat and Cajun style fries. It is an amazing meal. It will immediately put you to sleep into a food coma afterwards, but it is well worth it. There is one in my old apartment. There was one walking distance from my apartment. So
it's funny you mentioned the put you to sleep thing, because I've went to Pepe's once, went to a game in Pittsburgh, went to Pepe's, and then had to drive back to Connecticut right afterward. And it was a struggle getting into Eastern Pennsylvania. And yeah, I made it, but yeah, it was a battle. Favorite nerdy part of your job with MLB teams that you've liked?
So this one is, kind of came in the more recent years. Teams have these projections on players, and whether they're we project them to hit this slash line, or we project them at this value. I always found it incredibly interesting, and part of my job actually was figuring out when the projection doesn't line up with the production in either direction. Is the projection too high, too low? Are guys overachieving? Are they underachieving? Is this going to be just a 1-year thing? Is this a career? Is this career changing? And what was interesting to me about that too is that while it was data driven, those numbers are data driven. A lot of times the reasoning behind that, why there was a difference, would come from non-data sources. So like a swing, like a guy made a swing change in the off season. Like the data can't show that. The data projection starts at, we make those projections at the start of the year. That swing change starts, comes in that new year. So like why, trying to figure out and piece together why these projections aren't lining up exactly with production.
I think I want to say JD Martinez, when he was with the Astros, he got let go and made some change in the offseason that they didn't have the data for, just, through 10 spring training games, goes to Detroit, all-star, et cetera, et cetera. That's a tricky thing. And finally, favorite how did I get here moment, meaning, we're working in these, cool jobs from the outside. How did I get here moment where you're just like, wow, this is pretty cool where my career has gotten me?
Yeah. So I think one of those times was my first team flight, traveling with the team, just sitting on a charter flight, and, there's Chick-fil-A waiting for you on the plane. And, there's, all the snacks and food you could want. That was pretty cool. But one in particular, kind of like one day that I think of was, I had a lunch one off day in San Diego where it was our pitching coach, our bullpen coach, and our bullpen catcher, along with our video coordinator and one of our analysts when I was advancing. And we went to a sandwich shop. We drank about 3 bottles of tequila off day, and we just hung out for 2 or 3 hours at the sandwich shop, just talking baseball and all this stuff. And I think about that day, I was like, wow, this is really cool. A lot of people are never going to hear the stories I'm hearing right now, and a lot of people are just like never going to have this experience that I'm having right now. And I wouldn't get this any other way. If you're a random person in the sandwich shop, like, you're not going to come sit with us. It was one of these things that I think about from time to time. Yeah, but it's one of those things that I think about from time to time.
No, it is a lot. The downtime is sometimes the fun part, where I've had the same thing where you're having dinner with whatever TV analysts or something. You're like, I'm here with these guys who played in World Cups and these women who won multiple titles, and it's just it's a little bit surreal sometimes. All right. Joe Hultzen, TruMedia MLB Team Lead, veteran of over 10 years with 3 different MLB teams. Thanks for joining us here on Expected Value.
Thanks, Paul.
Back in the TruMedia studios, I'm Paul Carr. Thanks again to Joe Hultzen for joining us on the show. I'm joined now by producer Sergio de la Espriella. Sergio, what did you take away from the chat with Joe?
Thanks, Paul. It's good to be back. It's good to hear you say my name correctly after such a long absence. You succeed. You don't try. You succeed.
I thank my grandparents' Puerto Rican heritage for a little bit
it's the Dolphins fan in you.
Trill the R and things like that. That's right. Yeah, been a little too much time in Miami, maybe.
There you go. No, it was great. The Joe interview was really great. I thought that it was. I like to kind of bring things back to, like we all do as humans. We bring things back to what we know. And as the listeners know, I have a background in theater and performing arts and the theater industry. And it was kind of funny to see and hear Joe describe the process of how he kind of got to where he was today and all of the high working, low paying jobs that he had to do. And I was thinking to myself, is this a baseball career or is this a theater career? I wasn't sure what was going on there. But it's just very, those are the unsung heroes, right, of organizations. Those are the people that really make things happen on a micro level. And if you don't have your micro things in line, you can't do the high level success that teams like the Diamondbacks, teams like the Nationals can want to do. And it was just nice to hear someone describe their journey and just the dedication and all the success that he had and where he is today, now that he's, we're very lucky to have him here at TruMedia. So it was a really cool story to listen to and how he went and progressed through all those things.
Yeah, I think my kind of high level takeaway was kind of a similar thing and stuff I kind of knew, but he just said this really well, how MLB teams are like any other company in a lot of ways. You're talking about it with as far as just the, you work your way up sort of thing and different jobs that are available. I saw a lot of similarities between my ESPN time and what he was talking about. And it's teams are, I said this in talking with Joe, teams are the very clear kind of sexy analytics type of job that people want to get into. And there are a lot of great things about them. There's also things to be aware of. I'm not saying they're better or worse than any other job because they're different. Like, you can experience highs like nothing else with a team of winning a title and lifting a trophy and winning games. If that's not a priority and you want more normal-ish hours, there are sports data companies and other things like that to work for. It's good, I think. And what I try to do with some of these things is just open people's eyes. They can know what they are or aren't getting into or what's interesting to them, because different kinds of jobs appeal to different kinds of people for different reasons at different times of life. And it's good to know what your options are, because this kind of analytics world has changed so much in the last 5, 10, 20 years. It didn't exist 20 years ago when I was in college, and now you can major in sports analytics at some places. So things have just changed so much that I always think it's good to know what's out there, know what the possibilities are, see what interests you, and take it from there as you try to, we're all trying to figure out where we want to go and what we want to do with our careers.
Yeah, and it was cool because he, like a lot of people, you play the sport that you, like a lot of people working in sports, right? You play the sport that you kind of end up becoming a part of, and it's because there's only a handful of people on earth that are good enough to play at the highest level, and just because you can't doesn't mean that you don't know about sports. Just because you can't play at that level doesn't mean that you don't contribute to a winning team, or like us here at TruMedia, to somewhere where you can contribute to a company that is helping teams become the best that they can, right? Like I could imagine, being an analytics staffer on a World Series winning team will feel different than, us who have had quite a few championship programs in both the collegiate and
win a World Series. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. We full disclosure here at TruMedia, when the playoff brackets comes out, we look at the field and go, okay, we have, I guess there's now 12 now. So it's like, okay, we have 10 of the 12. So we want one of these 10 teams.
Right.
But that must be different than if you're working.
We're rooting against you.
Exactly. Yeah. No hard feelings, but it's that thing of, wanting to just stay involved and contribute, and that kind of, it's the best of what team youth sports is, right? The best of what youth sports is working together towards a common goal and a common purpose, and learning how to work with others. And it's just cool to see how someone who once played, was so determined, to stick with that profession, whether, transition in a different role from on field to, if someone goes into coaching or someone goes into analytics and stuff, but it's still that you're a part of that team success. So it's really cool to see. And then, like you said, like for people like us who don't work with a team, but we do play a role in team success, it has its own benefits and its own advantages as well. So there is no one way to work in sports, right? There's unique paths and unique situations. I would have never thought that studying musical theater, I would end up the job that I have today. And I think that is just, I am one example.
Yeah, you'll be ready for our musical theater analytics podcast coming in 2029.
Yes, coming soon. Yes, coming very. No, it is not coming soon. But the point is, you never know how you're going to get to where you're going to get, and I think that was a great overarching theme of that.
Yeah. So, all right. Thanks, Sergio. Thanks again to Joe Hultzen for joining us on the show. TruMedia, we made several new hires over the past couple months, and we're planning to work them into the show rotation so you can get to know them a little, and more importantly, gain some insight into how data is used by teams across Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, college baseball, and more. So stay tuned for some of those coming up in the next few months. For more shows with people inside baseball, check out our archives. We've got over 50 episodes and guests, including Twins assistant GM Daniel Adler, Nationals Quality Assurance Coordinator Jonathan Toscas, former Iowa pitching coach Robin Lund, who's now with the Detroit Tigers, and a whole lot more. While you're in there, please subscribe, rate, review the show. That's always helpful. And please share the show across social media or wherever you can. On behalf of Sergio de la Espriella and all of us here at TruMedia, I'm Paul Carr. Thanks again for listening to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world.